Welcome to the channel. And in this video, we're going to be talking about battery disconnect switches, the different types of battery disconnect switches, how they're wired up and what they're used for, and what I found out in searching for the perfect disconnect that I'm going to use on my LS swapped S10 build that's in the background here. So let's get you zoomed in on the table and take a look at these battery disconnects. Okay, right here we have three different name brands of battery disconnects, and this video is going to be more centered around drag racing and the applications that these are used for. But speaking of applications, there's a lot you can do with a battery disconnect. If you've got a tractor or a classic car that's stored for the wintertime and you have some type of parasitic drag or a small drain on the battery, you can install one of these, simply disconnect the battery, and that'll save your battery. I myself like to disconnect the batteries and bring them in when it's cold weather. If you're cold, they're cold, so bring them in, they'll last longer. That's the way I look at it. But RVs, guys that camp, they use these a lot to disconnect their batteries from when they're setting up their camper, storing their camper, things like that. And theft is another good one. You can mount one of these in the trunk of your car. Makes it more difficult for a thief to steal the car. If the battery's disconnected, they try to hotwire a switch or something, it's disconnected in a remote location where they can't see the disconnect, they can't get the car. Another thing is if you do periodic electrical maintenance on your car, you could put one of these on there. It saves you from having to take the battery cables off and disconnect the battery. That way you can simply flip the switch and turn the battery off. Now, there are other types of battery disconnects. There's the knife type that has the blade that slides down into the contacts, and there's the knob type that connects to the negative post of the battery that disconnects it that way as well. And since we're talking about the negative post of the battery, the general rule is when you install a battery disconnect is to disconnect the negative. And that prevents sparks. If you read any manual that starts you out doing an electrical diagnosis or diagnostics, they're going to tell you to disconnect the negative. And that's why, to prevent arcing and sparking and causing electrical shorts that normally wouldn't happen with a ground. But for this instance, again, we're going to be talking about NHRA rules and why we install one of these. Now, NHRA rule says that this has to be in a location that the technician or the tech can get to the vehicle and flip the switch, disconnecting the electrical system, shutting off the car from running. You want to disconnect, make sure the fuel pump's not running and things like that. And that's why I'm going to go through these and tell you why I picked this one right here. So this was the original battery disconnect I was going to use. It's a Fastronix 300 amp, part number 303-004, and you can see it has two lugs here. Now these are open when the switch is off, meaning current cannot pass from here to here. So when I flip this to on, you could get a reading from here to here if you were checking it with your meter. Now it also has a 20 amp set of screws right here that you could use. You could put an indicator light, hey, letting you know when you turn this thing on or off. Some kind of small circuit that you wanted to break that didn't draw more than 20 amps, you could put right here. But my misunderstanding when I purchased this switch is I could disconnect my alternator on these two, and that is not the case. Your alternator, you could have a 140 amp alternator, you could have a 160 amp alternator, and some of those bigger ones goes on up to 200 amps. Now, this is the Flaming River. You see these everywhere. This is a popular name brand. It is part number 1044. It's a 250 amp disconnect. It only has, you can see it has two lugs, so it only has a single set of contacts. You put a wire here and a wire here, and it disconnects those two wires with that one switch. If that's what you need, that would be great. Like I said, you could use something like these smaller versions on your tractors, your boats, if you store them in storage. Now there is another type that if you've watched my videos, I'll pop a picture up right here that shows this type of battery disconnect switch. And I built a 20-foot car trailer that had the winch mounted inside the toolbox. And this is the type battery disconnect that came with it, so that's the one that I chose to use. So getting back into this video, this is the battery disconnect that I opted to use. It is the Moroso 74108 right here, and it has two sets of contacts. They're labeled AA and BB. And what this is going to allow me to do is run my battery to 1, make sure I'm pointing at the correct terminals, yeah. these two are B, these two are A. So I can run my battery to 1 to my starter, then I can run my alternator to 1 back to the battery. And when I disconnect this or turn it off, it's going to cut the disconnect from my alternator and from my battery. And you may or may not know this, but if you do not have this alternator wired to where you can break the connection from the system, the fuse box going into the fuse panel inside your car, the alternator will sustain enough power to keep your car running. And that's what NHRA says. So when I disconnect this switch, I have to be able to get the power off of the alternator and out of the switch panel so that the fuel pump will disconnect and the car will shut down. So in talking about all that, let's go over here to the whiteboard and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It'll make more sense to you when we draw it out. So let's go over here and get set up and talk about it. Okay, this is how I'm going to wire my S10. These are not going to be the correct electrical schematic symbols, but we'll get our point across and make it easy to understand. So we've got our alternator, we've got our starter, and I'm going to be going over the 4-post Moroso switch that I'm going to use. Can you use one of those other 2-post switches? Absolutely. And I'll tell you why I'm going to use this instead of one of those 2-post switches. Now, we've got our fuse panel. This could be a relay panel. I would wire it a little differently with a relay panel. This is for a vehicle. You're going to remote mount the battery in the trunk or in the bed. And this is the way I'm going to do it. And it's going to be neater, safer. It's going to run a little bit more wire, but it's going to be easier for me to install and make it look aesthetically neater on the backside and be able to diagnose and troubleshoot because the circuits are going to be simpler to me. So when we look at the battery, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come off, and since I'm running an EFI, I'm actually going to run my cable all the way up to the engine block. And from the engine block, I'll come off the engine and go to chassis ground. Now, most cases, most people just run a ground at the back of the car, and they'll run off the engine block at the front to the chassis frame. So this would be chassis, this would be chassis, but I'm actually going to run mine to the engine block. We'll just leave that like it is for now. So on the Moroso, you'll notice there's 2 A posts and 2 B posts. Now the B posts are connected together mechanically on the inside. The A posts are connected mechanically on the inside. So when we come off the battery, I'm going to use the B post for my battery going to my starter. On my alternator side, I'm going to come off the battery. I'm going to go to the A post and go to the big lug on the alternator, not the little plug. That little plug's your exciter wire that tells your voltage regulator to kick in and charge. So we're going to hook it to that little 1/4-inch 5/16 bolt on the back of the alternator. Now from the starter on my S10 and a lot of GM vehicles, on the firewall you've got a little junction block. And those wires typically will come up from the fuse panel, and there's 2 that have the little fusible links that go into the fuse panel as well. And all those wires, if you look at them, take them out of the harness, they're all connected. And this typically goes to the alternator. Now we can't do that here because if we run this straight to the alternator, even when you disconnect this switch, this alternator is a power source. So it's supplying voltage, and if I disconnect it here, my fuse panel is still live, meaning my fuel pump is still live, meaning my fuel injectors are still live, my radio, my gauges. So the car will continue to run if you do it that way. If you connect from here to here, you're supplying power. And that's why I want to use this switch. We're disconnecting the alternator altogether so it disconnects the charging system from the car. Now I'm going to run a 4-gauge wire to power that. And notice when I disconnect this rear mounted disconnect switch, I shut off that power, so it should shut the car completely off. So we turn it to on, turn the disconnect to on. These 2 connect, these 2 connect. I've got charging back to my battery. I've got full system power on my fuel injectors, my distributor. If you're running a distributor, I'm running EFI, so I don't have an LS and I don't have a distributor. But all of your internal gauges, everything, your lights are all powered up. Now, what I am going to do differently than a regular stock setup is right here, I'm going to put 2 fuses. Because I am running long runs of wire through the chassis frame, up and around components, I want to have some kind of protection on the system. So on my alternator side, I'm going to put, I have a 140 amp alternator, I'm going to put a 150 amp fuse. On my cranking side, I'm going to put a 300 amp fuse. And I'm going to measure all this current with a meter once we get the car wired to make sure that I've got the proper size fuses. But because I'm running those long distance of cables through the frame and stuff, if something were to happen and it chafes or gets up against the frame or gets cut or I'm in an accident, these fuses will protect my car from burning down. Now, this being the remote mounted disconnect, NHRA says when you disconnect it, turn it to the off, and you turn this off, you have to shut the vehicle off, and that's what this is going to do. It's going to break both the alternator and it's going to break the starter. And because my starter is, I'm feeding off my starter for my fuses, I will no longer have voltage there. So that should shut down my fuel pump. Everything should be shut off. I'll take you down off the tripod and we'll show you the truck and the components we're going to use. So this is what I've got. I've got an aluminum battery box. This is my 1-aught alternator cable because I am running, you know, about 12 feet or so. 2-aught battery negative cable. My battery ends, my terminals. I like these because you can tighten them up. And then you've got a 3/8 bolt on the back if you want to add additional components, which I am going to add a relay box that's going to power my fuel pump. It's going to power my transmission cooler fan. If you've been keeping up with the video, you know where all those components are at on the back of the truck here. Obviously, I got my battery. I am going to use mega amp or mega fuses. I heard a guy say one time that mega fuses and A&L fuses are the same. They are not the same. From my experience, these terminals on an A&L are different widths, so you can't replace a mega fuse with an A&L. What's the difference in an A&L and a mega? An A&L has a faster blow rate, or it disconnects faster than a mega fuse. So, but I'm using mega fuses. I've got my crimpers, I've got my disconnect, my sheathing that I'm going to use. I've got the Alex Tech. That's going to be in the next video. But basically, we're going to put the remote mounted disconnect here. So if the NHRA Tech cuts it off back here, it kills everything up front. I do have some battery charging posts that are going to be mounted here and here. And then if we walk up to the front, I'll show you what I was talking about with those GM wires. So here is the terminal that's on the firewall that you can connect your wires to. This is typically connected here. That goes to the inside of the fuse box, and these are typically on the back of the alternator with the battery cable. I'm going to move them to here. 4-gauge wire is going to go down to my starter. And again, this is my starter cable. And when it's connected back here, when I disconnect my remote mount disconnect, that's a lot of disconnects, when I turn that switch off on the back, it's going to kill power here, which is going to kill this wire up to here and kill the power going into the fuse box. It'll kill all of my electronics and the engine should shut off. Wow, that was a lot of disconnects. Well, that's going to end out the video. As always, the part numbers to those battery disconnects will be in the description box below. If you like this kind of content, hit that like button. Share this video with your friends. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button before you leave. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.